everybody. Welcome to Two Peas in a Podcast. We're excited to have you here with us today, and we have a very exciting topic to talk about. The holidays are right around the corner, so this topic that we're going to be discussing today is right up the alley of having meals together and cherishing those times, but we'll get into that in just a second. But before we get started, we wanted to let you know that we are on YouTube as well as Buzzsprout, so if you are listening on one of those platforms, please like, subscribe, hit that subscribe button that we want to make sure we are going around the world eventually. So we need your help in doing that. We appreciate you being here today. So today what we're going to be talking about is the importance of family meals and understanding the family tradition, because we have Thanksgiving in a couple days. So Michelle and I, which again, I'm Deana Spencer. So I was so excited to jump into this topic that I kind of forgot that I needed to introduce myself. But I am Deana Spencer. I am a figure skating coach, as well as have some background in sports psychology, as well as nutrition. And we have Michelle Rawls with us here today as well. So I'm going to have Michelle introduce herself real quickly right now. So,
hello, everyone. I am Michelle Rawls, and I am a functional nutritionist.
Perfect. So, which is great, because our topic today is understanding this family tradition of, kind of the Thanksgiving meal and even the holiday meals that we have coming up. And so a lot of things kind of go into this. So we're going to try to tackle, this thing is so broad, which of course most of our topics are, it's hard for Michelle and I to kind of like stay focused, but that's because they're just so interesting. So we hope you get a lot out of what we're talking about today. And one thing I just kind of wanted to hit on was the way that this topic came up to talk about was I actually did a paper of this and this topic in college in my psychology classes. And originally I was trying to study obesity in children, because as you well know, that is something that's ongoing, right? But we're not going to really hit on that topic. But what was interesting to me was how it kind of diverged into the importance of having a family meal. And so we're just going to kind of talk about what is the purpose of this? Why is it important? What are the benefits of it? Like, what do we get out of it? Because obviously we always talk about, oh, we should all be sitting down and having meals together, but nobody really dives in and talks about why, what the benefits are, and any of that. So a lot of times when we have the why behind what we're doing, we're more apt to do it. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So the purpose of like family meals and why they're important is they're actually like part of a family ritual and a tradition. And we don't really think of them that way anymore, which is a shame, I think, because they really are. Like when you kind of look back, especially honestly, like the era of Michelle and I, that was, let's just keep it real. Right? We're like, gosh, just keep it quiet. But anyway, but we did grow up with that. And it was something that was expected. It was very, very normal to be home by a certain time and to have a family meal together. But it serves a multitude of purposes, which I'm kind of excited to talk about, because not only does it dive into the individual person and how it serves them, but also in the family unit as well as society. So that's what's really interesting to me. It can provide healing, a sense of belonging, and obviously connection to one another, which I really feel like nowadays is super important, which we're kind of, we're pushing it to the side, but even at this point in time, and Michelle would probably agree, I don't think we're doing it as on purpose as maybe we used to. It's almost like a requirement now.
Right.
Or it's almost expected of us to not put that as a priority. So why don't we just kind of dive into this? And then maybe Michelle can kind of hit in. I know that you and I were talking about how now, like literally you can go to restaurants and you see people, on their phones and really not having conversations with anyone in front of them, but they are having conversations with people who are not in front of them.
Exactly.
So I remember going to a restaurant and I literally looked over, there was 4 or 5 20-somethings, and literally nobody was talking to one another, but they were on their phone, every single person. And I started giggling because I'm like, why would you spend the money to go eat with people that you're not talking to?
Why come together if you're not going to talk to each other?
Right. So I just thought that was kind of funny, but
hey, Deana, let's go on a dinner date. Bring your phone.
Right? Exactly. We'll text each other while
Right.
we're there.
Right.
And I hate to say that, but been done. Like,
It has been
you get a
done.
text message from the person
Yeah.
across the table. But let's go ahead and get into a little bit about, Thanksgiving is literally in what, 3 days or something.
Yes,
So
it is. I'm
like,
ready.
yeah, and it's, I think let's talk about a little bit of the nostalgia that was created when we were, well, even now. I mean, obviously people still have Thanksgiving meals and stuff like that, but it would be really cool. I'm just going to throw this out there right now. It would be really cool for some of our audience if you want to comment in the comment section, like maybe some of your favorite memories, maybe something that you missed or that you could do again or that you still do, because a lot of times, and that's what the cool thing is about all of this, is that you have these long-lived memories or nostalgic feelings that you get to experience every year, and that's part of the tradition that you have created. You're part of that creation, and so that's what's kind of cool. It's like, well, I might even have Michelle share her times. Like, we all have that. I remember when, right? I
You're
remember
really
when we
gonna tell
all
your
used to go,
when,
right?
if you're gonna put those in the comments, guys, let us know how long your traditions have been, because we would really like to know. We just looked at a recent study, so we'd like to know, how long have your traditions been? Put them in the comments. Has it been 20 years, 5 years, 10 years? Let us know, because we'd really like to know. I mean, my fondest memories are, everybody was expected to be at grandma's house. You had to be there by noon. If you weren't there, she was watching the clock. Why are you late? You better have a reason as to why you were late, and it better be a good one. So, but every Sunday it was just known you were at grandma's house by noon, and you were to be seated at the dinner table, and you were to get ready to have food, because she had food all over every Sunday. So Thanksgiving, though, was even more. And Christmas was even more than that. So she had a stove, because my grandmother's house was born or built way back when. So there was a stove in the middle of the dining room. That stove literally had food on top of it. It's a wood burning stove. It's how they heated the house.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there was food on top of the stove that was still being able to stay warm. She had a freezer on this side. So the freezer was loaded with all the cakes and pies that she had made. And then the table was a huge, 8-round table. And it would have all the main courses on the middle of the table. But then your side dishes were on the stove, and all your pies and cookies and all that was over there. So, but you were meant to be at the table. And it was a way for us to, while we all have issues in our family, like everybody does, we still were expected to be there. It was a respect factor for my grandmother and my grandfather.
Right.
No matter what, you were to be there, and you better have a reason as to why you're not. So
yes,
I think that's what we've gotten away from today.
Oh, for sure. And I kind of wanted to dive into that, because I think nowadays, I'm just going to hit on this for a second because I don't want to stay on it too long, but I think it's easier to use excuses now as to why not to do it.
Oh, absolutely.
You and I were just talking about this, but it's like, we're so busy. We're
good with excuses.
Oh, easy peasy.
I can make you 100 of them before we get done in 5 seconds.
Right. Just plug that excuse in. Right. We're good to go. Right. But we make excuses, like we'll say, maybe we eat one time a week together, but if something comes up, it's easier, we'll just reschedule. It's those types of things,
right?
Or we go out to eat, and let's talk about that for a second, because going out to eat is not the same thing.
No.
And we'll talk about that a little deeper down the road. Yes. But I think kind of taking into account, let's just dive in, because I feel like some of the things that we're going to talk about are really going to kind of branch out into things that are kind of looming over my head right now. But just real quick, one of the studies that I was looking at said that you needed a minimum of 4 days a week to actually see the benefits of this. And we'll talk about the benefits in a little while, but just wanted to throw that out there, because I don't think that happens right now. I think that we might.
Yes, please put it in the comments.
Yes.
Actually come to the table 4 or more times, in a
not restaurants.
Week. I would love to know
meals,
that. Not a restaurant. I want to know that you're at your home with your family making a meal 4 or more days.
Yes. So let's talk about kind of the ritual, because when we basically when we have an expectation for people to show up to the table, first thing that comes to my mind is respect. Not just for the person who, like mom or dad, it's more for everybody. Like if you don't show up, it's not like everyone notices, like especially if the expectation has been there. And I remember as a kid, it was like, you be home by 6, you know what I mean? Like, where are you? There was a kid that I played with, and her grandmother would blow a horn. Like we lived in a trailer park. So it would be a certain time, like we'd be all playing after school and you would hear this huge horn go off. And she would look at us and she would say, gotta go. And off she went. That was dinner time. Like she had to go. But I remember even checking in with my mom. It would be like, what time, be home by 6 because we're going to be eating dinner. And so we were always like, I remember getting in trouble because we didn't have watches half the time. We didn't have cell phones, so we were playing at the park. She's like, the lights are coming on. You know what I mean? Like, as a kid, like you just remember those moments when you got in trouble because you didn't show up on time. But
street lamps came on, you were home.
Exactly. I remember that so well. But let's talk about, because let's get into the rituals and kind of the traditions and why it's important, how everyone's involved in that. So the ritual can provide cohesiveness, purpose, communication, family interactions, which obviously build strong family units, provides healing. So we're talking about nurturing one another, listening to one another, those types of things. Order. I think this is a really cool one because it provides order to a chaotic day.
Yes, it does.
Right? It relieves stress. So like if you're having a stressful day or a chaotic day, you can come home and eat a meal together. And then you also play a role in the family, which we're going to get into a little bit, but it's not just you plopping down. Like a lot of times when there's a family meal, somebody might be helping with getting the beverages or provide, putting the place settings out, or asking, like, hey, what would you like to drink tonight? Or there was usually a role for everybody, or hey, can you get the napkins? Like you're serving one another. So in a lot of these little aspects that we don't recognize, that we just kind of like, we don't see them because they've never been brought to our attention. But there are things that go into this that help build character. There's a respect level. Working through differences. Like one, I just read an article actually a little while ago, and it talked about having the kids pick their seats, and if they're fighting, that you help them resolve the issue. So there's all these little things that happen that I think really that we don't see as helping build up who we are. And I
think everything you just said is people don't see anymore. I don't think people see the order. I don't think people see serving others,
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so important to understand why serving others is such a vital part of being in this process. And let's talk about that, here in just a few moments, because I think it's very important.
Well, I think too, just kind of even talking about it right now, I feel like there's a maturity that happens.
Oh, absolutely.
Like when you're putting others in front of your own needs, which, oh my gosh, that's a huge topic right now. I feel like
too far down on that one, but you're absolutely correct. You hammered it. Yes, there is. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that when, like, I'm just going to use I have a couple friends coming over Thanksgiving, but I am jazzed. I'm excited. I want them to have a great experience. We've got all this food. They asked what they could bring. Like that's part of it. They asked, what can we bring to contribute?
Right.
And, and so there's already that interaction of wanting to help that couple as well as us have a great experience together. That right there, like literally sums up kind of even what we're talking about a little bit here. And I think as a family unit, like helping do the dishes, helping clean up, helping take out the trash, or whatever it is. Like obviously there's all these little things that can be helpful during that time, and serving your brothers and sisters and serving your parents and vice versa. And all of these other things kind of going into that. And again, learning to be respectful towards one another, showing up on time.
You may not like the situation, or you may not like some people in the family. Hey, let's be real. Let's just be real. Everybody, not just me, not just Deana, but everybody has unresolved issues in their family.
Oh, for sure.
That's where you put it all aside,
Mm-hmm.
and you come together and you actually have a conversation that doesn't represent whatever issue you've got going. You
Mm-hmm.
come together for respect of everybody, and you socialize and communicate, serve each other, still having that respect factor. I'm passing you the roles. We have our differences, but here it is. Please take one and let's move on. We'll discuss that down the road. And these are the things that I want people to understand that has been lost. You've allowed other outside factors to destroy that tradition and that nostalgia that can be created.
Well, I think you and I were talking about this too, was when you pull up studies, like my studies are very old, like they're old just because I did this paper a long time ago. However, if you look at current studies, and that was kind of a big factor too that you and I talked about, was I guess the data that's being pulled now, because we're probably looking at the last 10, 15 years-ish.
The report that I had was November 15th of 2022, done by the New York Post.
Right. And I pulled one up, just an article, but it was like from 2016. But even then, the dynamics of expectations and all that type of stuff was way different than back in the 90s and the 2000s and things like that.
Absolutely.
So the reason why I was bringing that up is when you're talking about you may not like somebody, could be wildly different than you quote unquote not liking someone at dinner back in the 90s versus now, because back then you had interaction more often.
You did.
And you learned to communicate probably better versus somebody now, because nowadays people they eat whenever they want. It's very rare that everyone sits at the table unless there's a special occasion.
And they have these little tools to deviate from.
Correct. And so like how many families, like even our audience, I would love to know, do you have a rule that cell phones are not on the table, or that you have some sort of way to eliminate distractions where you are focused on one another?
I would love to know that.
Yeah.
Please let us know. Do you put your cell phones in a basket before, you go to the dinner table, or do you make them turn them off but still keep them at the table? I'm curious. I've known a lot of families that'll say, just turn it off, but you can keep it at the table. That's not helpful.
Right. It almost reminds me of like when you go on a date and the guy's still on his phone and you just like how does that make you feel? Like you don't feel like you're a priority.
No, you don't.
Oh gosh, what is this guy's name? I love the way he talks about leadership. Gosh, what is his name? It's going to kill me. Anyway, he says that when he talks to people, he literally puts his phone. It's not even in his hand. Because when he talks to people, there's a subconscious level of you're not important because I have this in my hand, and if something comes through, you will be ignored.
That's exactly correct.
And so he tends to put things away. He'll put it in literally hands free. Like it'll kill me now.
Awesome.
But anyway, so
like that.
Yeah. So I just thought that was kind of cool. But so just again, what I'd like to do, because there is kind of that era, I guess, difference of
there are generational differences.
Yeah. So with that being said, we can talk about our own personal experiences, but I do think it's different today as far as getting back to that, because I think today it's more of a challenge. But what I'd like to do is kind of talk about all of the cool things about doing it, because we kind of already know some of the problems, but we're going to talk about the benefits.
Oh yeah.
But kind of to encourage us to kind of get back to this a little bit, you know what I mean? Or maybe a lot. Let's just say
the whole point of our podcast today is to give you that information so that you can think about all the great benefits that we're going to talk about in order for you to get back to that, or work your way in that direction, however you would like to. But let's talk about those benefits. Come on. I want to do it.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm just going to I'm going to machine gun some things here, and we can just talk about them as they come up.
Sounds great. Let's
but
do
obviously, like, well, one thing that this one's kind of cool. And this one kind of makes my heart go a little pitter patter. Teaching by example or mentoring or some form of teaching. The first thing that came to my mind was teaching your kids how to cook a family meal, or not a family meal, but we all have a dish that we grew up with that we're like, oh my gosh, I love grandma's pies, or like whatever.
I love grandma's chicken and dumplings.
Right. And so there's things that we miss, like as we get older, it's not there anymore. That really brings back good memories. Or this recipe was passed down from 3 generations. Like, are those things still happening? You know what I mean? Like,
if they are for you guys, put them in the comments, because this is information we're looking for. So we actually have some branch off subjects coming with this, so that's why we're asking this. So give it to us. So
yes, so I think it's really cool to kind of even think about that, like, you know, that tradition, even if it's verbal or like you write recipes down, or you know what I mean, or just even if you don't cook it yourself, but there's that really awesome feeling and warmth that you have from being able to experience it. Maybe it's during the holidays where it's only done once a year or twice a year or whatever, those types of things. So there's that teaching by example.
Passing recipes down from generation to generation becomes a great tradition within itself, because then you can take that recipe with your family and say, oh, I remember, you know, when grandma would, you know, say, hey, let's make this dish. And then we together, you know, before dinner, we'd make this dish together. And then
I still have recipes handwritten from my mother that are sitting in a green box over there. And my sister was like, I need the recipe because she forgot which ingredient was it in. I had to go look for it. So there definitely is that involved, but also like kind of the idea of, well, you know, some of the examples too are teaching by example, like doing the dishes and cleaning up and serving one another. Like those are obviously one of the things, but we did touch base on communication. Like that's a whole other rabbit hole we can get down, but learning how to communicate, resolving issues. But I don't really want to paint the picture like that's a time to kind of like have all it, like it can be a fun conversation. It can be a self-esteem building conversation. It can be, hey, let's plan your future. Like, what do you want to do? Maybe you're trying to find a college and you're 17 years old and you're confused. Like having the parents there to help you get through some tough decision-making things, you know, like where are you going to be?
All the family is around to have those conversations. Keep it light, because maybe you've got grandma and grandpa there, or maybe you have aunts and uncles there. So keep the light conversations going, but yet it can still be a motivational, inspirational, educational time frame for everybody.
And I think it just happens naturally. Like it doesn't have to be like we're going to, you know, but I mean, and it kind of goes back to the whole idea of just simply asking, how was your day?
Oh yeah. Like, keep that simple. How was your day? You know, I mean, that starts a whole conversation.
And like getting like, maybe I'm just going to say maybe venting a little bit or discussing and getting perspective. Like there's so many things that come out of this that I really feel like we're losing out on so much with this, because the way people communicate now, I'm just going to say we've done a little dippy do with that type of thing. But give me just a second, because I had some things written out.
Well, we have more introverts today. We have more introversion today than we have extro, and so we have more issues with mental health and depression and things like that. So,
well, I'm even going to go as far to say social awkwardness,
right? But I think that, you know, the more we can keep communication open in these senses, it will help in so many ways to stop that little dippy do, you know, and bring it back up, you know, and that's what I'm hoping this podcast inspires for people today.
So yeah, me too. And I was just I just want to throw this out there. I've been looking at this article from the familydinnerproject.org. So I think it'd be beneficial for people to kind of take a quick look at that. It says, well, anyway, you can go look at the website. But anyway, so I was looking through their little article on benefits of family dinners. So I just kind of go down this list a little bit, and Michelle and I can bounce off of each other. But, you know, let's talk about how it might benefit children, or, you know, I guess the younger of the family units. But
great place to start.
Right. Better academic performance, because you are getting guidance, you know, and you are talking about what's going on in school and those types of things. Higher self-esteem, which I think is obviously important.
That is a good one.
greater sense of resilience, which I think nowadays we're really seeing the lack thereof.
Absolutely.
Being able to handle tough situations, being able to handle maybe situations that might come up in school where there's a confrontation or having to stick up for yourself or something. There's so many different things.
Kids these days have less coping skills than we did.
Right. And it doesn't even have to be a conflict with somebody else, but it could be receiving bad grades or not making
a cheerleading team, or
correct.
Maybe they didn't make the swim team, whatever the
Mhm.
case may be. It's a great opportunity for them to bring that forward in a conversation and let the family help.
Right. Exactly. Lower risk of substance abuse. So, I'm going to kind of list a couple of them because they kind of fall into the same category for me anyway, but like teen pregnancy, just things kind of like that have to do probably more on the social side of teens and things like that, eating disorders. But I think too, like when you are with your family and you talk and things like that, there's an expectation of a level of respect. And then again, having, your moral code is set within you know what I mean? Like there's just more of that because you are discussing certain things and like, son, that's not what we do. Or, if I were you, maybe think about it. Like you just start setting moral standards and things like that within just through general discussion. So you kind of walk out the door or go to your next day, not necessarily being told what to do, but you are being taught how to respond or handle certain situations.
Absolutely.
Just through conversation. So, one thing I do want to hit on, because it does bring it up here, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later, is obviously higher nutrition level, just by eating healthier foods and through cooked meals. So basically that would go into lower rates of obesity, cardiovascular health in teens, because that's an issue as well. One thing that I found interesting that they talked about on here was, lower risk of depression, which kind of goes with what we were just talking about, but a bigger vocabulary in preschoolers.
Oh, I completely agree with that.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that.
Like completely agree, because whenever you've got the smaller children, now I do know that when we were growing up, the smaller children were usually placed in one table and the adults at the other table. But I do see more as time went on, everybody was pretty much integrated into one area, even in my family. However, I did notice, the younger cousins creating quite the vocabulary out of themselves as they sat with those adults and paid attention to the conversations that were being had. Not to say that necessarily need to be involved in those conversations, but they do pick up on ways to do things in the teaching process. So yes, it's a great opportunity for younger children. Absolutely.
I thought that was just really interesting because I was like, and think about it too, like the parents' profession and things that they do that you could learn from, or like, like I'm just going to throw this out there. Like when you are in a specific profession, your kids will automatically think that that's of the norm.
Right.
It doesn't matter what you're doing. I'm just saying, like, you talk about work and you talk about work ethic and you talk about what's possible with, you know what I mean? Like if you're whatever, you know what I mean? But like without kind of having those conversations or being around those conversations, I can just see kind of a loss there as far as like, again, work ethic again. I mean, I honestly, where I work in a recreational facility, obviously coaching, but with the front of house, basically, you see a very different mindset of when I was younger, of showing up to work, doing what's being asked of you, like those types of things.
Now you're making me think about my grandchildren, and I'm like, okay, so they see two adults in the house that actually go to a job, and then they see grandma working, going, she doesn't leave the house. She doesn't, her clients are on the phone, so I'm thinking, okay, are they confused now with what work really is? Or
I wouldn't think so. Well, that's a great question though. Like, what is the standard work for corporate America? Is that really what's going to be socially acceptable? I mean, it was for a long time.
It was, but
Mhm.
now, the entrepreneurial world is really taking over. And
Mhm.
that's why we've got such shortages in our workplaces, because people are really trying to work their own hours, their own way.
Mhm.
So now I'm thinking, is this 5-year-old and 2-year-old getting confused on how life's really supposed to function?
Well, I mean, that is, well, and honestly, life is supposed to function that way. If you are an entrepreneur, you're still going to speak greatly about taking care of your clients, and you're going to talk about, I can't do that right now. I need to make sure that this person's blah, 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 blah. Like,
Right.
I do that sometimes. Like, we'll be cooking dinner or something, and I'll be like, oh, I got to get back to this client tonight. And I'll send a quick text. Now, it's not during dinner.
Right.
Hopefully not. I could be in trouble right now.
I mean, the whole
But you
thing
know what I
is
mean? But like I am
so
exuding, yeah, I'm exuding like I do take my business very seriously,
absolutely.
and I do communicate as much as I can. I'm just saying, I don't think it would be confusing. I think that it's really, I wish more people, I'm not even talking about teenagers, I'm talking about people now would be a little bit more entrepreneurial and pursuing that thing that's been there since they were how
Right.
old or
Right.
whatever. But
As long as they wanted to do it. Yeah. No,
different,
it brought
yeah.
up an interesting question in my head. I was like, okay, am I confusing them now because we're talking about, careers and jobs and things like that. So
Mhm.
I'm going to be paying attention, especially
Yeah.
this season.
I know. Isn't it funny though? Because you and I were talking about, like, I love our topics sometimes because you really can go down these rabbit holes and like how important these things
Absolutely.
are, and like they just branch out into all these different areas that make you go, like
And we knew
and
this before we started. We talked about this. We weren't going to
you
rattle
know,
on.
it's, I
So
know. Well, we say that every time we do a podcast. We're like, we're going to try to stay on track, but we don't, and that's okay.
we're
So,
back. It's okay. Keep going. We're going.
right. So we kind of talked a little bit about that, but one thing before I kind of switch gears here is I wanted to talk about taking note of how, like, what's going on at your Thanksgiving meal. Like when you get together with your family, like, how are you participating and how are you contributing and how are you feeling served? Or, you know what I mean? Like, what are you bringing to the table? Even though that's kind of a fun little saying we say
What
sometimes,
are you
but
bringing? But what are you also offering?
that correct. And are you thankful for those serving you?
Right.
And that's not just on Thanksgiving. Like, are you saying thank you? Are you know what I mean? So it's just kind of a really cool time to kind of take note of what's going on around you and
You bring up
being
a great
appreciative.
topic, the respect factor, in the sense of thank you, please, yes, ma'am, no,
Hmm.
sir. I raised my children to be that way. You did not get your plate of food unless you said, thank you, ma'am. And
Hmm.
that's the way it had to be, or thank you, sir. Whoever was serving you or whoever you got your plate from, whether it be the uncle, the aunt, the grandma, doesn't matter, but
Hmm.
that's the way it was. Or please, can I have, ma'am? So I get a lot of people, that say, gosh, your children are so respectful. Like, where'd you teach that? So,
Right.
but
Well,
I,
I mean, this is a little off topic, but like today I had a new student and I would say, does that, we would go over an element and she would say, yes, ma'am.
Mhm.
Does that feel better? She'd be like, yes, ma'am. And I was like kind of taken back because you don't hear that very often. But such a delightful person, I mean, she's a child,
But
but it
think
was
it really
so,
quickly. What was your thought process? You were
I
like,
was
wow.
thinking, that household is solid. That's my first, and I'm not going to say all of them are that way. I'm just saying my first
That
thought
was your first
was,
thought.
mhm,
That's good.
yeah,
That's
because
awesome.
yeah. So there's a couple families there that I'm like, wow, like it just exudes that they're very family oriented, which I love. Like you just don't see it as often.
You
But um so yeah, we can kind of go down the nutrition side of it too, but before we did that, I wanted to kind of also touch base on, this is kind of a cool area too, symbolism and tradition, because that's also a part of what we're talking about. So obviously, Thanksgiving meal is a tradition, our holiday meal, maybe Christmas time, or if you celebrate something else during that time. There's a lot of tradition attached to that. And so again, we go back to the what's being served. Like for instance, when my family just came out, we had our own little Thanksgiving because we're not going to be together during that time. But we insisted, we were just kind of like, well, we have to make all the dishes that mom made, right? Because it's that taste, it's that feeling, it's that nostalgia that we're seeking, right? And so we quickly made, not quickly, but we made all of those things that helped bring back that time that even she and I had together. She's my twin sister. So, but it's almost like you don't even think about not having something in place of that because it just wouldn't be the same. Right.
That's
So, but I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, there's a lot of tradition and culture. There's, so different things and how we celebrate certain things. So symbolism and tradition could be like celebrating milestones, birthdays, baby showers, funerals, going to wakes, things like that. But it also can extend out into the community, like when we have barbecues during Super Bowl, or there's a lot of different things that when we come together to eat food and celebrate certain things or mourn the loss of, right? And like I said, different cultures, which is also a very interesting thing to me, how people may celebrate certain things or mourn, right? We sometimes see that, I'm going to say on television sometimes, when we see how different cultures mourn the loss of their loved ones versus how we might mourn the loss of loved ones. But that's a little off topic, but you know what I mean.
But think about the different foods from those cultures. Everybody's their certain style in their culture of what they serve. Mm-hmm. So that brings the next phase of this, of what we're talking about, is the fact of how that nutritional part of it plays a huge role as well. So
I'm going to throw this out there because I thought it was fun, and I did it. I was going to start this. I was going to start this tradition, but I didn't get around to actually do. I might start it again, but I had a Christmas meal that I served my friends, and I basically put a bunch of countries in a jar, and I pulled one out, and then I decided that I would try to find what was being served from that country and tried to at least embrace some of it or make the dessert or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so I based my whole meal off of, I think it was Italy, when I did a Christmas one. Yeah. So I tried to do the desserts, or I can't remember, to be honest with you, but what was really fun about that was I got introduced to new things. Like, honestly, I got introduced to mulled wine, which was fabulous. So just kind of different things like that, where it's like, oh, you just start experiencing new things. Yeah. Through food. But like you said, like I have a couple of things here, like even in the paper that I wrote, talked about Jewish funerals would often serve circular type foods like eggs or beans or, those types of things, because the circle represented life, the circle of life. And so, like I said, these types of like meals and things like that really go a lot deeper than what we give them credit for, or give them credit. Like we just kind of go, oh, my family wants me to have dinner, and we roll our eyes, which is, there's so much more to it.
But it's the new things that you learn too along the way with your traditions. Whenever I married my husband, I'd never heard of green bean casserole. I'm like, what? Like, what is that?
Even now, I'm like, Michelle. I'm like, what kind of American are you?
We did not have that where I come from. So
that is funny, because to me, it's like everybody in the United States.
Right. He acted like I should have known what that was, and I'm like, green bean casserole, I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, at our, Thanksgivings, it was the turkey, it was the brown beans and cornbread, it was the chicken and dumplings, it was sweet potato pie, it was, all these other things, and then he pops up a green bean casserole. Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, if you know it, you do it, because I don't know anything about it. So.
Yeah, like you said, like the brown beans, and I'm like,
brown beans and cornbread.
Yeah, so we never had that. Like we would have obviously our mashed potatoes, we'd have stuffing, we would have green bean casserole, and then we would have the yams with the marshmallows and, those types of things, and the cranberry sauce in the can.
No, ours was done. I mean, ours was fresh cranberries that Grandma always had to go pick. So,
and Grandma.
Do her.
So it really does create a unique experience, I think. And again, I'm going to throw this out there to our audience. Take note of what is unique and appreciate it. Like, not everyone's getting what you're getting, or that you might have like that awesome favorite dessert or whatever's going on, and cherish those times, because they're not going to be there forever.
No. But make sure you're passing them on too.
What's that?
Make sure you're passing them on too. Teach them to others, or teach them to your children. We talked about how family's not always blood. So if you have a special friend that, loves that, teach it, make it an effort during the season to do it together.
Oh, totally agree.
Something new, maybe.
I even made my sister one time, I photocopied in color the actual 3x5 cards my mom had written on. And I tried to make them as authentic as possible looking, so that she had a copy of my mom's handwriting in the recipes that were her favorite recipes.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so then I got her a box and put those in there. And I think I put a little picture of her and my mom like in the box. And so again, it goes back to bringing those feelings of nostalgia and tradition. So it's very, very powerful. And, we're all coming up on that time in the next few days, or even in just the next 6 weeks, probably, of being able to experience all these things. And I'm going to throw this out there too. Like, not everybody has a blessed home. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but a home that feels warm, that feels giving, that feels all of those types of things. But just remember that you have the opportunity to start creating your own traditions, quite frankly, even if it's for yourself.
Exactly. For yourself.
Yes. And so, but like if you're married, or if like if you have friends who are single, like you can always start a fun new tradition that can carry on for years. So if you're feeling a little bit like, well, I don't have that, you can create it. That's what's really cool about all this, that we have the power to create our own environment, our own world, and just kind of go for it. So I would love to hear even that, like even traditions that you've maybe created on your own that have really blossomed into something, or even something that maybe you do for yourself every year. I'm going to talk about that for just a second, because I do this every year now, and it is my ultimate cherished time ever, ever, ever. Every Thanksgiving, everyone writes their goals and stuff at New Year's resolutions. Right. But every Thanksgiving, I sit down. It's PJs, coffee, and a snuggle bug blanket. And I will spend at least, I don't even know how long, probably 2 to 3 hours writing my goals for the next year. And it's such a cool time to look back. I have my old goals from the year before, or that current year. And then I go over what I want to see change. And I really think through, and I journal. And it is like one of my favorite times that I do for myself. And so there's those types of things too. I know it's getting aside from the family meals, but it does go into tradition.
Oh, my tradition is to sit down every Christmas Eve, have a glass of wine. Well, actually, it's a bottle of wine. And I wrap the present. So
and again, that's another tradition, right?
Every Christmas, I sit down, wrap them all up, drink my wine, and we watch some type of Christmas show or movie. And, that's and it's usually, I can't even think of the name of it now. It's the one where, you're going to shoot your eye out. What's the name?
Oh, A Christmas Story.
Yeah, Christmas Story. It's usually that one. So
I love
usually 3 sheets by that point. So
there's so many lines in that movie, and I kind of want to go off and do them, but I'm not.
No.
I'm like, no, that's for another podcast too.
Right. We'll do that.
Okay. So again, even as we're talking about this, we're smiling, we're laughing, we're talking, there's like these memories of nostalgia coming up, and just having that emotional connection to what we're talking about. And that's what we're really talking about now. And why these things are important. Now, again, we're talking about Thanksgiving and kind of big meals, but this has to do also with your weekly, daily meals that need to start becoming a priority. Now, Michelle and I were talking about this before, where, can you, I mean, is that even a possibility in this day and age? But I think that
Well,
it
we were talking
really
about how
comes
busy
down.
all the families are now, and you were talking about how, you know, you have the kids that they're in all these different activities. And
Yes.
like you said, with the one child that was telling you, well, I have this all in one day, I was just like,
Yeah, just to kind of clarify, I was telling Michelle this. I had a little student, and she was like, "I have dance and I have piano." I don't even remember everything that she had, but she had like a language class, and then on top of figure skating. And I said, "Wow," I go, "That's a lot in one week." And she goes, "That's just today."
that's
And
too
my jaw hit the floor, and I'm like, I used to look over and see people with fast food bags. I've mentioned this before, and the parent, whoever the mom, usually the mom. I would look over and I would see him falling asleep or crashed out in the bleachers
right.
because they're exhausted. And so, again, this kind of goes back to what you're trying to create in your family. Again, maybe start off with one day a week or what have you. But I really do think that it's time to take our own power back
Right.
and setting our priorities, because the thing is now we've allowed, just kind of like a lot of times when we start allowing inch by inch room, we change our societal expectation.
Right.
And so now the expectation is we don't have a family meal. The family meal is almost non-existent. Because even if you do have the intentions of having a family meal, you got one kid who's got football practice, you got another one who's got dance, you got the parents going back and forth, bussing back and forth, and you're going to make the meal, but everyone grabs it when they get home. They're
You
not
also
eating
got
together.
kids are
Huh?
going back and forth. Like
No,
in my
that's what I
house,
mean.
I've
Yeah.
got kids going back and forth. You were making me think about whether or not we even have meals 4 days out of the week, because I take care of my grandchildren, of course, and so they're zipping out the door on Tuesday nights, which I usually try to get them a meal before they leave because I want to make sure they're fed. And then they come back on Wednesday, and so then Thursday we have a meal, but Friday they're zipped right back out the door.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to make it a quickie. You know what I mean? I'm like,
yep.
Nuggets and French fries works, right, guys? So, but I do have a normalcy in our home in that sense. So yes, because kids are in between parents all the time. So
yes.
that's something that also is very disturbing and, disrupting, I should say, in that process as well. So
yes,
create some type of tradition, and some type of, value to it, because it's important.
Well, I think like what you said, though, it's like taking those times and making them the best that they can be, but also setting a level of expectation that this is dinner time. This is a time to be respectful. This is a time to be open to chat. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, just kind of like obviously having a very loving time.
Right.
And again, we might even have another conversation at some point about actually prepping food and the energy that goes into food. Because you and I touched base too, like, if you're constantly ordering out or eating food that's not actually prepped by the home, the family unit, kind of thinking of what kind of energy is involved in creating that food. Like we say, this was made with love, like you and I kind of were joking around about that, but it's very true.
It's very true. The energy that goes into the food it continues through the food into that next person or whoever eats it,
Yeah.
There is a huge energy source that goes into that. So, and the nutritional value of it.
Correct. And which I'm sure we'll have another discussion about that, because
we'll extend further on that on another time. So
most definitely. But let me see if there's anything else I kind of wanted to touch about, because we were talking about like what the current social norm is right now.
Right.
And, and honestly, if some of our viewers and listeners want to talk about what they think about that, I would love to know your opinion, because I think that we have really gotten away from a lot of things that
absolutely
would not hurt us going back and slowing down a tad. And again, that's another rabbit hole because I don't want to get too deep into that, but there's so many factors that play a part in that, expected over time.
But if you're listening to this, there's nothing wrong with slowing down.
No.
And taking that opportunity to say, hey, we really haven't done this since this time, and maybe it's time we start it back up again. And, maybe slow our pace down and maybe pull the phones away from the table. That's what I'm hoping everybody takes from this, is the love that is being lost in this whole process of being able to sit down and just be able to touch one another in some sense of value.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's exactly the point of what we're trying to get at. And I was just sitting here thinking, like, what are a couple things that you can do? Is one, simply start off by one meal, not having phones.
Right.
Like everyone can survive. But even like if you really feel stretched, why can't you start with like having a very fun meal once a month where it is literally the priority? It's going to be fun. Somebody plans the meal. Like start a tradition that way. And I know we do kind of want to shoot for the weekly, but if you're just kind of like really tapped out, try to find a creative way to like kind of make it happen. Like
Maybe
even if
have
it
a
is once a
taco
month.
night. One brings the cheese, one brings the tomatoes, one brings the
Mhm.
onions, one brings the meat, one brings the pita.
Right.
Put it all together, and guess what? You all come together
Mhm.
and actually make it together.
Right. Right. Or yeah, and even just that's such a simple meal, fast and easy, but it's still homemade. You guys are working together, having somebody cut this vegetable or grating. I remember grating the cheese as a kid. Who
Oh,
wants to grate the cheese? I do. And we make that mountain, you know,
yeah.
with the grater, you know.
Absolutely.
And it was a fun thing to do. Like we would fight over who got to grate the cheese.
Yeah, just take everything to the kitchen and everybody gather around and start, you know, prioritizing who's going to do what. You know, you're going to cut the onion, you're going to cut the, but as you do it together, you get that ability to communicate, to create that nostalgia, to love on each other, to share how your day was. And it just starts from there. So do it once a month.
Yeah. And I think too, like, let's kind of keep in the back of our mind too, that this also branches out to our communities and our society, because we are becoming stronger as a unit, stronger as a family. And it really can all kind of start from the home and the family meal and having those special times together and creating something together, and then branching out to our neighbors and our friends. And obviously that kind of has a ripple effect, which most things do. In all honesty, most things do have a ripple effect. So everything that you
do that anymore, like a new neighbor moves in and you take them a meal. I've thought about that now that we were talking. You were just talking about it. I'm thinking,
well, ooh, another topic, right?
I moved here a year ago and nobody has done anything like that. So, you know.
Well, what's funny is I do have a neighbor. We just moved in a couple months ago. I do have a neighbor here who when she does see me, she comes and chit chats. And like just because we've talked, like I'm going to be probably making cake pops soon. So and if anybody's ever tasted my cake pops, they're really yummy. But I feel compelled to take her a few. And there's another woman across the street who has cancer and she's having chemotherapy. But she told me she's actually the chief of police.
Oh, wow.
And but just kind of knowing, just even having a one or two conversation, I already feel connected to the neighborhood, and it doesn't take a lot to.
You know more about yours than I do mine.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the thing. It's like just literally just that little bit of interaction. It doesn't take a lot, and I think that we've kind of created in our head that there's this colossal type things, like just ask a question, say, "Hey, how you doing?" Or what have you, instead of constantly looking at one another like you're an enemy, or, oh my God, you know, like, don't bother me, or like those types of things. You be like, for me personally, everybody has a story that's interesting. I don't care who you are.
Right.
I don't care what background you have. You have an interesting life. Hands down. Everybody does. Yeah. And I think it's just cool to be able to tap into that and say, well, how'd you get here? You know, you'll go down a rabbit hole with them and learn about them and how they ended up where they are. And it's interesting. Like, it just is. So there's so much out there. Like, let's kind of start thinking about that, tapping into it. And quite frankly, the people that you're living with are just as interesting.
But start with them first.
Correct. That's what I mean.
Start with them first.
You know, like,
you to your neighbors.
Yeah, we do have to prioritize.
Right.
So,
keep your family first.
You know, but I think with that being said, I think that it's really easy to kind of take each other for granted and go, well, they just have this and that, but like really diving in deep, I think, and having, like, how do you feel about that? Like, when's the last time someone looked at you and go, well, how do you actually feel about that?
Right. When were you last asked that question? When were you last asked that question?
Right. Or, you know, or how's that making you feel?
Right.
Like, you don't get asked those questions typically. So maybe start asking the questions, you know, and getting a little bit deeper. What's that?
My therapist.
Right? I pay that person to
I
ask me
pay
those
for that.
questions. Yes. So maybe you can get it home instead.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's kind of like just wrapping those things up. But I do want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving and any holiday that you're celebrating during this time. But again, we would love to know what you're thinking and, maybe share some of your own personal experiences, maybe some nostalgia, tradition, or even starting your own traditions. Or, whatever you want to drop down there, we would love to hear from you and maybe some ideas even that you have that we'd love to know about. So,
because it will definitely help other people when they start reading through the comments. It will give them ideas. It will give them motivation. It'll inspire them. So let us know how long your traditions have been going and what you do. Maybe you've got your favorite recipes. Share those. We'd love to know those too. So
yeah, I'll be collecting those. That would be fun. Our podcast cookbook. That would be kind of fun.
So I actually started a new tradition myself. So I've been collecting everybody's addresses since I bought our first home just a year ago. And now I'm going to send out Christmas cards with a recipe. So everybody's getting a Christmas card with a recipe from me. So yes. So I'm excited. I'm ready to go.
That sounds, I actually miss
If you want to know what I've been working on, that's what I've been working on.
Yeah, now my brain's spinning. I'm like, what do I want to do?
But I wanted to do that because we just bought this home and I wanted to create a tradition that I could pass along, not just for what I'm doing with the boys. I want the boys to know and understand what it means to actually send out Christmas cards, send them a little recipe of something that my grandma used to make. So I get to move that forward.
Okay, cool. I'll send you my address.
No, I do need it.
Yeah. Okay, I'll send it to you. Yes. That's like a really cool idea. That is a fun idea. Now,
I really want to do it. It's something that's kind of being done throughout our area. And so I thought, well, I have so many friends, as you know, I have so many friends and clientele that is not in the Missouri area. So, I definitely thought it was a great idea to send it out all these different states with all my clientele and all my friends. So I think it'd be great to share.
Yeah. I make pie pops and cake pops and things like that. So I like to give those to my clients.
Those are awesome. It's hard to make.
They are hard to, like when you actually do it the way you're supposed to do it, they're time consuming. So, but I'm excited. I just bought some things, but anyway, we're kind of getting off track, but yeah, but I do like to I like to see people's faces light up, and it's just kind of like bringing food and connection and with people is such a cool thing. And we miss out on all that all the time, So let's try to embrace it this season, even if it's, you just kind of just do it once or like get going or come up with a plan or whatever. Again, we'd be excited to hear about it. So
absolutely.
Yeah. But anyway, Michelle, do you have any other comments before we get going?
I just want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving, many blessings, and be well. And I hope everyone saw the value in our podcast today and that you will share it, spread it with joy and love. And please let us know. We have questions and we'd like to know.
Yep. So again, happy Thanksgiving to everybody who has joined us and those who will be joining us later on the recordings. We wish you a very happy Thanksgiving and we will see you at our next podcast. So thank you for joining us on Two Peas in a Podcast. Sorry, Two Peas in a Podcast. And we'll see you next time. Okay.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.